Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. If you're joining us on YouTube, thanks for stopping by. We'd appreciate it if you would subscribe to our channel for more videos on all things aphasia. This is Ask the Expert with Dr. Roberta J. Elman, who will be talking with us about the life participation approach to aphasia and the importance of aphasia groups. I'll be your moderator for this hour-long session. My name is Jen. I'm part of the team at the National Aphasia Association, a nonprofit organization that provides access to research, education, rehabilitation, therapeutic, and advocacy services to individuals with aphasia and their care partners. On today's agenda, we'll be hearing from Dr. Roberta J. Elman. Then we'll open up the floor to those in our live audience for questions. And now I'm honored to introduce our panelist, Dr. Roberta J. Elman, President and founder of the Aphasia Center of California. Dr. Elman is an internationally invited speaker, author of numerous professional publications, and editor. Her research and clinical efforts incorporate the life participation approach to aphasia, and she is a recipient of the Venerable Audrey Holland Award for her distinguished contributions to the life participation approach to aphasia. Dr. Elman, thank you for being part of this series.
Thank you, Jen, for having me here, and thanks to the National Aphasia Association for the invitation, and Darlene Williamson, president of the NAA. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen in just a second. But what I want to say is this is actually kind of a hard presentation to do because I know we have lots of different people in the audience. We have people with aphasia, we have family members and friends, there are students that are studying speech pathology, and then there are probably experienced clinicians as well. And so I may not be able to do everything for everyone, but I hope that everyone will take away some points, and hopefully in the questions and answers, if I haven't explained something well, maybe I'll get another chance to do it then. So I'm going to spend about 15 or 20 minutes on the presentation before we do the Q&A. So let's see if the Zoom technology, let's see if I can share my screen here. And hopefully it'll go well. Here we go. So as Jen said, I'm going to be talking about the life participation approach to aphasia and the importance of aphasia groups. And I have some contact information here, some ways to stay in touch with the Aphasia Center of California. You'll see we have a Facebook page, an Instagram page, and a Twitter page. And I'll also have this information at the very end of the presentation, so you don't have to hurry to write it down right now. So I want to start with my disclosures, which is typical when you're doing a professional presentation. So I want you to know in case you think I have a conflict of interest, I want to be very transparent about that. So I have a salaried position at the Aphasia Center of California. I'm the founder, and we're now 25 years old, so I've been doing this for a while. I also received some royalties on the second edition of the book, Group Treatment of Neurogenic Communication Disorders, The Expert Clinician's Approach, and that's published by Plural Publishing. And another book, also published by Plural, is a book that I co-edited with Dr. Audrey Holland, my friend and colleague, and that book is entitled Neurogenic Communication Disorders and the Life Participation Approach, the Social Imperative in Supporting Individuals and Families. The Aphasia Center of California receives royalties for 2 MedBridge courses. Those are courses for healthcare professionals that I did about aphasia conversation groups. And the Aphasia Center of California receives proceeds from sale of our book connection materials, which include a manual and some communication supports for facilitating aphasia book clubs. And then my non-financial disclosure is I serve on some committees or advisory boards for a variety of aphasia-related organizations. So that was a mouthful. So hopefully now the disclosures are out of the way and we can go on to the presentation. So a social approach to aphasia intervention. I want to kind of get us all on the same page. Okay. It's actually that social approach is relatively recent to aphasia intervention. And so when I say recent, it really began in the 1990s. I have here in earnest, meaning that's when we really started thinking about it. However, there were pioneers before then, and one of them was actually the founder of the National Aphasia Association, Martha Taylor Sarno, who wrote about social approaches early on, even in the 1950s and 60s. And my friend and colleague, Dr. Audrey Holland, they were really some of the pioneers. So they're kind of the exceptional people. And then the rest of us started really thinking about the social approach in the 1990s. This was also around the time that the World Health Organization was revising their framework. And that was actually published in 2001. This is called the ICF, for those of you students and speech pathologists, just to ground us here. And as some of us were thinking about the life participation approach, we were getting early draft copies of what the World Health Organization was proposing. So that really influenced us a lot. And then finally, the life participation approach to aphasia was published basically 2000, 2001. And there were 7 of us who were authors on this, basically a position paper. We wanted to make some change. It was kind of a political statement, a position paper. And those people were Roberta J, Judy Deshan, myself, Linda Garcia, Ora Kagan, John Lyon, and Nina Simmons Mackey. And we were just ordinary individuals. We were all speech language pathologists, but we weren't ordained by anyone. We didn't like the way basically the services that were being provided for people with aphasia were decreasing significantly, and we wanted to take a stand. And so that's how this all kind of came about. And we got together on our own dime, and met, talked on the phone, got together, and then wrote that position paper. And so LPAA, Life Participation Approach to Aphasia, is basically a social approach to aphasia intervention. So it's under social models or social approaches. So let's talk a little bit more about it. What is it? It really focuses on wellness and quality of life, and the importance of social connectedness. And there's a lot of research, not just in speech language pathology, but really in psychology and other health care provider services, that social connectedness is correlated with longevity. That means that people that are connected with other people, now I'm not just talking about people with aphasia, I'm talking about anyone. The more social connections you have, or at least a good number of social connections, there are research studies to suggest that you live longer. It's important to be socially connected. And I believe that speech language pathologists have a responsibility to connect people with aphasia with their friends and family and other people with aphasia in order to help them maintain some interpersonal connections. And we'll be talking some more about that too. So what else about a social approach? Well, social approach really realizes that conversation and communication are super important. And why is that? Well, it's everywhere, right? I'm conversing with all of you right now, and conversation is very important. It's because it's the way that most of us create and maintain social relationships. And we've all been challenged with that during the pandemic, haven't we? It's harder to have conversations now if we're not face to face with people. And when you're living with aphasia, it's even harder. But in addition, conversation is really the way that all of us interface, the way we do things in our communities and our society. If we want to turn on the gas at a new house, we have to call the gas company, or we have to type in a way with language to turn something on, or we go to the bank teller to make a deposit. We're using communication or conversation in various ways to achieve those kinds of goals. So social approach really focuses on conversation and communication. It's also important in a social approach that we take that insider's perspective. And those of you living with aphasia out there listening now, you are an insider. So a person living with aphasia has their own perspective that no one else has. So what's what works for you or what you're interested in is not necessarily the same as the someone else. You should be the team captain. You should be directing the type of services that you're getting, along with your family, of course, but that you really are the person that has the decision making, and that this must be acknowledged and incorporated into speech language pathology goals and intervention targets. Sometimes we call this, there's lots of names: client-centered care, family-centered care, person-centered, but you really need that insider's perspective. You are important to making decisions about what you want to work on, or what activities you want to be involved in, or what life goals you have. So when we came out with this LPAA position statement, kind of political statement, these were the things that the 7 of us could agree on that were most important. And so there's 5 core components. And these words maybe are a little difficult to read, but we can talk about them in basic terms in a little bit. So I have the explicit goal is enhancement of life participation. What do I mean about that? That means that no matter what, let's take the case of speech language pathology, no matter what the speech language pathologist is working on, they should be thinking about how is this going to transfer or carry over into your life outside of the therapy room. How can we get this to be something that is useful for you and meaningful for you? It should also be that all of those affected by aphasia would be entitled to service, meaning that when someone has a stroke and aphasia, it doesn't just happen to the person that had the stroke, but aphasia is affecting the immediate family, friends, work colleagues, the community at large. And so there are many people in that network that really are entitled to have some types of services, and we'll talk a little bit more about what those might be in a bit. This is something that comes from the ICF, really, that World Health Organization framework, that both personal and environmental factors are targets, or should be targets, of assessment and intervention. That means the personal things would be kind of your personality. Are you outgoing? Are you more withdrawn? Are you an optimist? Are you pessimist? And then environmental factors are things outside of you that might be causing a barrier, like where something's typed out, like maybe signing an informed consent for a medical procedure in the type of legal language that you might be asked to sign, and none of us can understand that very well, or that maybe we can make that aphasia friendly. So there's ways of taking things that would be barriers in the environment and making them more aphasia friendly. And then the speech pathologist and the person with aphasia and family should measure via documented life enhancement changes. What's really making a difference in your life? Are the goals that the therapist is working on starting to carry over? Are they figuring out ways for that to happen? Is there things like partner training happening, etc.? We'll talk more about that too. And then finally, the 5th core component is that emphasis is placed on availability of services as needed at all stages of life with aphasia, meaning that the aphasia might have happened from a stroke 2 years ago, but maybe right now you really need some more services because you want to take a volunteer position or a part-time job, or maybe you're getting married or something where some amount of therapy would really be helpful for you. And so we knew when we were writing these core components that this was a dream, right? This wasn't the reality of healthcare. And so we knew that advocacy efforts should be targeted to those core components that were not available in healthcare systems. And now it's been 20 years and we're still a ways away, although I think that we've made some progress in the last 20 years. Sometimes it's outside of healthcare environments, but I think there's been a lot of positive changes for services for people with aphasia. So the life participation approach, so I want to kind of maybe combat some myths, because sometimes people think that it happens after you're done with speech therapy, then you do LPAA. And I'm here to say that that's not the case. That isn't what we were thinking of. It really should begin with the initial assessment, and not just the initial assessment of the person by the speech language pathologist, but maybe the initial assessment of the paramedic when they get the 911 call, right? When the emergency paramedics come. And it lasts until the person with aphasia no longer wants communication support. So that is not really how our healthcare system is set up, but that would be the ideal, and that the life concerns of all those affected by aphasia form the center of the decision making. So again, the person with aphasia is the team captain, and then the other family members and friends are really helpful and their input is needed. And that emphasis should be on life re-engagement by strengthening daily participation in activities of choice. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So some examples. So if the speech language pathologist is giving a test, they might have to do it in a standardized way, but some tests also allow the therapist to start doing some, we might call them diagnostic probes, or seeing what happens when the person is given some more communicative support. And that's really important because the speech pathologist, once they learn what supports are effective, can then use that for partner training of spouses and kids and friends and etc. Other healthcare professionals. Another example of LPAA would be making the environment more aphasia friendly by reducing barriers and increasing facilitators. So here's maybe an example. If you go into a restaurant and you have aphasia and your reading is impaired, if it's hard to read, you could be given a menu that would have photographs of the items on the menu rather than just words. And so that's a way to make the environment more aphasia friendly. And there's lots of examples. Maybe we can talk about some more of those in the question and answers. And then working with family members, friends, and colleagues on life participation goals. So LPAA isn't one thing, it's an umbrella, and that there's lots of things that could fall under it. Conversation groups, advocacy work, supported conversation, partner training, and even some what speech therapists would talk about as impairment level, like semantic feature analysis, other types of approaches, VNest, MIT, TUF. Lots of things, as long as you're thinking about those core components and that you're thinking about transferring beyond the treatment room. So what I want to talk about now are some essentials for aphasia treatment. I have about 5 more minutes, so let's see if I can wrap up here. So treatments suggested that I'm going to suggest here are all evidence-based approaches. And they're selected based on a number of research studies that people with aphasia are telling what they would have liked to have received, or the family members would have liked to have received, their friends wished that they had received in the first few months. And also my own clinical experience now with more than 30 years, I think I'm almost 40 years of meeting thousands of people who are living with aphasia. So this is just basically a checklist, and it's called CAPE. So this is a mnemonic. So what I think the initial things for people, especially with moderate to severe aphasia, these are the things that I would wish that the speech language pathologist would at least check off, think about with the person with aphasia and family that these things are in place. And the C is connecting people with aphasia, the A is augmentative and alternative communication, the P is partner training, and the E is education and resources. And I'm not going to go into it any more than that, except to say that we have a card on our website, aphasiacenter.org, that people can download. So I'm just going to talk now about connecting people, because that really happens with aphasia groups. So why didn't I ever meet other people who had aphasia? And what I want to say is, even in a very metropolitan area like the San Francisco, Oakland Bay area where I live, people with aphasia rarely meet other people with aphasia unless they've come to a group. So it's a very isolating condition. I don't need to tell you that. That language barrier of the aphasia limits access and to get more information about the disorder, and it also limits the ability to maintain and create social relationships. So many people with aphasia feel that they are all alone, that no one else is living with the disorder. They've never heard of it, probably. And this can cause or exacerbate depression, lead to general distress, and meeting other people with aphasia can provide hope and be an important way to see an example of living successfully with aphasia. And I believe that if you can connect with other people and connect people with aphasia together, you can prevent maladaptive ways of dealing with the disorder. So I don't need to tell you the National Aphasia Association has really also done some of these studies. Hardly anyone has heard of aphasia in the general public, and most people haven't heard of it until it happens to you or a family member. So we need to fix that, but in the meantime, we need to connect people. And so there's some ways to connect people with aphasia centers, groups, and programs, formal visitation programs, aphasia conferences, aphasia camps, arranging meetings, online options, virtual aphasia groups, and we can talk more about that in the question and answer. So I want to talk about, these are just some possible benefits. Lots of stuff here, but basically you got a lot of people around a table or virtually, and so a lot of different things to talk about, a lot of different people to talk with. You're likely to have more carryover into your outside environments. And it's also a great environment to work on and to improve psychosocial functioning. So lots of people are challenged by depression or trying to cope with their aphasia, and groups can be one way, not the only way, but one way to attack that. And so what I'm going to end with here are best practices, and this is taken from research in psychology, social work, speech language pathology, other healthcare. And I want to do a shout out to some colleagues at other aphasia centers for their input on these as well. Suzanne at Stroke Comeback Center in Virginia, Julia at Minnesota Connect Aphasia Now in Minnesota, Fabi, Friends of Aphasia in Arizona, Maura at Triangle Aphasia Project Unlimited in North Carolina, and Debbie at Voices of Hope for Aphasia in Florida. So these are the things that I think are important about groups. The size of the aphasia group is important. Fewer than 10 people is best, and this is really supported by a lot of the research in a lot of other fields. Otherwise, the group starts to function more like a classroom. Consistency of group members and group facilitator is important. Without consistency, you don't really get to know people well enough to have that cohesiveness or the trust, and that's unlikely. The experience and the training of the group facilitator is really important. I don't think I can emphasize this enough. Almost anyone can do an aphasia group, but you really need training and experience to do it well. It looks easier than it is, I guess I would say. And how you group people is important. Group members must have similar goals, and sometimes you want to group by interests, other times by severity of aphasia. It all depends on the purpose of the group and the goals of the participant. And this is also one that is really important. Communication support is important. Many people with aphasia benefit from communication supports when provided by trained facilitators, because communication supports allow people with aphasia to participate. That's that life participation. The content and structure of the group is important. Some groups will be more structured. For example, book clubs that we do are more structured. Everyone is having that same content, reading the same chapters and talking about them. But other groups will focus on general conversation, and they may be less structured. So those groups have the benefit also with less structure of addressing some of those psychosocial topics. And if the facilitator has those necessary counseling skills, this is tough stuff. I think doing groups is one of the most challenging thing I've ever done in my almost 40 years of speech language pathology. And so the less group structure there is, the more skill that is needed by the group facilitator. So I'm going to end with a couple of quotes. The first by Roger Ross, who was a stroke survivor with aphasia, who also facilitated an aphasia group himself. He said, "I have a sense that after my stroke, I did not get better until I met with other people with the same problem. My colleagues," and there he's talking about other stroke survivors. And I believe that joining a group is the most important thing that a stroke survivor can do for himself or herself. And some other closing thoughts. So this is kind of a summary. Social and life participation approaches should focus on reestablishing desired activities, desired social contacts, focus also on optimizing communication skills and improving quality of life within the meaningful life context and using the individual's perspective. And if you're a speech language pathologist or someone with a Phasian family, I think these are places to start, not to end, but to start. Connecting people, augmentative and alternative communication, that's the AAP, partner training, E, education and resources. We really talked about connecting people today. And here's my last quote, one that I love, by Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And so that kind of gives me optimism. And last, ask the expert. We had a cat raising their paw, and so I thought it was equal time for the dog this time. So here I promised you some ways to stay in touch with us at the Aphasia Center of California. You might want to take a screenshot. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open up for some questions. And I want to introduce you to someone very important as I do that as well. So thank you. I know that was fast and a lot of information, but I hope you got kind of the gist. So let's see if we can get one of my colleagues from the Aphasia Center, her face to show. So this is Geeti Sira, and Geeti is a wonderful speech language pathologist at the Aphasia Center of California who started 2 months before the pandemic and did face-to-face groups, and then was like my right hand to getting the Aphasia Center up and running on Zoom. And we transferred everything we were doing onto Zoom groups. So thank you, Geeti, for the last 2 years. We've been through a lot together virtually, right?
I would say so, yeah.
And so the other thing that Geeti is a very clever person in lots of ways. And she invented using an iPad to as a camera basically, and come into a Zoom meeting to show keywords. And so when she does her groups, she keywords so that people can see what as she's talking. So I'm not as talented as Geeti. I'm not going to try to keyword as I'm answering questions, but she's going to be my keyworder. So we're gonna spotlight the keyword screen.
So there we go. Needed permission.
Oh, keywords needed permission.
Yep.
All right. And so thank you very much, Geeti, for doing this for me and for the NAA. So thanks, Jen. I think we can go to some questions.
Give me one moment, please. Okay, there we go. First, thank you so much for those beautiful quotes, especially the one by Margaret Mead. That was so lovely to end the presentation with. Thank you and Geeti also for being here with us today. As a reminder to our audience, if you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A chat. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a button that says Q&A. I'm going to start us off with some questions that were pre-submitted. So our first question is, what was the catalyst for you to adopt the life participation approach to aphasia in your therapy?
So it was a long journey. So when I started as a speech language pathologist many years ago, so I'm going back to the early 1980s when I started, the very early 1980s, I was doing traditional impairment one-on-one therapy. And I was frustrated because what was happening in my therapy room with someone with aphasia wasn't really changing anything they were doing outside of the therapy room. So what I mean is I could get certain things, certain words, certain phrases to happen in the therapy room, but then the person would leave and the family would tell me that, it wasn't really carrying over or generalizing. And I didn't feel like I was making a real difference in their lives. And so over time, I think the people I worked with aphasia were teaching me, took me a while to figure it out, that I needed to start concentrating on some other things. And I worked with some people where drawing, so they could use drawing to communicate in ways, not artwork, right, but doing some drawings. And I realized, like, wow, that is not something I learned in school, but something that could develop. And as it turned out, John Lyon, who's a physiologist, now retired, also came up with some programs with drawing. So if I could go on and on about this for too long, but what I want to tell you is, so here's a little show and tell. So the one book that I edited with Audrey Holland, this book, there's a chapter that I wrote in there. So if you're a speech language pathologist and maybe your library has it, I'm not trying to sell books here. One of the chapters that I wrote in the book basically talks about my entire journey as a speech language pathologist to get to CAPE, which was that 4-item checklist, if you will. And it talks about how I changed from being just totally impairment focused to looking at a social model. So I would point you towards that chapter if you're a speech language pathologist, and maybe that would be helpful for you to see that journey.
Thank you. Our next question, you talked a little bit about creating aphasia-friendly environments. So what can we do to help people, companies, and groups become more aphasia-friendly?
That's such a big item, right? An important thing. So I've given a lot of thought to that. I think it's challenging. I think that where we probably stand the best chance, well, first we have to raise awareness, right? Because in the communities and in businesses, most of them have never heard of aphasia either. So we've got to start by educating and raising awareness, which the NAA does a great job with. And then I think that people who are living in smaller communities or have the ability to do some kinds of training. So it really comes down to partner training of businesses and organizations with aphasia-friendly techniques, and also letting them know that if they can change some of their, let's say the restaurant menu that I mentioned earlier, if they change their signage. So what I mean by that is, let's say you go into a hospital for an appointment and you need to get to the neurology department. If you have aphasia, the signs are hard to figure out. They're hard for all of us, right? And so if we made our signs that were more universal, that used some pictographs or used some ways of communicating that weren't just with words, then not only would people with aphasia be able to understand, but anyone who doesn't speak English very well could also understand better. And we know you can do this because if you travel internationally overseas and you see what happens, like it's say in the airport, the signs are usually, they're pictures, right? They have a picture along with the word. And so even if you don't speak the language, you might understand the picture. So I know the NAA, National Aphasia Association, in the past, and I know that some other aphasia centers have developed aphasia-friendly business training. And I think that's another option, that you could go out with a group from a aphasia center, an aphasia group, or just even probably individuals, and offer training to businesses to help them understand how to be more aphasia friendly. So it's doable, but in a big city, that's a big task. So maybe some of you living in smaller communities could lead the way with that and kind of get some best practices for that.
Thank you. So someone in the chat had asked for the title of that textbook again, and just to let you know, I've put it into the chat box. Yeah. So you can always copy and paste it from the chat box.
Yeah, Neurogenic Communication Disorders and the Life Participation Approach. Audrey Holland, look for Audrey Holland's name.
Dr. Elman, what are some things that family members and care partners can do to help with communication?
So that's super important. And that's really where you need to start. So I would hope that most speech language pathologists could help family members by identifying the communication supports that are most effective for that person with aphasia. So we're talking about people probably with moderate or severe aphasia that are having a lot of trouble communicating because of their aphasia. Speech language pathologists should be able to do some more informal assessments or even more formal assessments to be able to say, you know what, keywords could help, drawing could help, slowing speech will help. There's lots of different things that could be put into play that one person with aphasia is not the same as the next person, so it needs to be individualized. And then once the speech pathologist has figured that out, so those are kind of those augmentative and alternative communication principles and techniques, they need to teach the family members how to do that, and friends and the bigger kind of social network. I also want to point people toward an online free course that the Aphasia Institute in Toronto has available on their website. And Gidi will write the website, aphasia.ca. We could put www.aphasia.ca, CA for Canada in this case. And they have a portion of their website called the Community Hub. And you need to join. So this is mainly for family members, okay, or partners. So it could be other healthcare providers, it could be businesses, it could be lots of things, lots of people in lots of settings. And you want to look for something called supported conversation module or training. And they have a free training available, and it's PowerPoint and it's videotape. And I think that anyone can benefit from that. Family members, friends should really go and see some excellent therapists who are demonstrating techniques of supported conversation. And I think if you view that, that's a good step. And the speech pathologist should be helping teach you as well. That being said, there are some speech pathologists that haven't in their own coursework learned about supported conversation techniques. So you might have to point them towards that website as well. I hope I answered that.
Yes, thank you. So one of our live questions comes from Natalie. She asks, how do you help people with aphasia and even their families and caretakers accept that their participation in life might be different, yet still rich, especially as they struggle with the grief or sense of loss of the life they once knew?
Yeah, that is such a huge challenge, right? So it's interesting because in the last 25 years, I've been doing and helping run an aphasia center where we almost entirely do aphasia groups. And I think the groups now, again, with experienced therapists that have some counseling techniques as well, other members of the group can help people who haven't quite gotten those coping skills or gotten, kind of being able to see that the glass is half full, not half empty, that they help each other. So that when you have a cohesive group and you have a skilled facilitator, those types of things start happening. That someone that comes into the group that hasn't moved forward yet, is looking back and not looking forward. Other people, along with the facilitator of the group, the skilled facilitator, can help that journey to begin. Sometimes it takes a while. There's not a set number of days or weeks or months. Some people get there very quickly. Other people, it takes more time. But I think that there's real power in seeing how other people with aphasia have done that. You can hear it from someone like me, a speech language pathologist, but it's so much more meaningful and to see other people with aphasia, and they're talking about things that they're doing and ways that they're doing something differently or adapting a skill or a hobby. So if the person hasn't tried being in a group, that I would recommend. It's very challenging. I mean, psychological counseling is also something that should be considered. Unfortunately, there don't seem to be a lot of therapists who have been trained in supported conversation and working with people with more moderate to severe aphasia. So, but the groups, I think, there's a lot of power in those aphasia groups when they're done well.
How can a person find aphasia programs in their area? I know you had listed a few aphasia centers, but we do get quite a few questions like, I'm in Atlanta and there's nothing around me.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple places to start to find the state-based, or local-based, geographically based programs. So the NAA has obviously probably the most complete listing on their website of not only aphasia centers, but aphasia programs and universities and virtual programs. The pandemic, with everything we've been through in the last couple of years, the one thing that it is really the silver lining, I guess you would say, is that there are a lot more virtual options, and some of those are national, some of those we've been virtual since March of 2020. So that's one place. The Aphasia Access website, and that's www.aphasiaaccess.org, all one word, aphasia access. They also list LPAA programs. The caveat, so just be aware that people are self-identifying as LPAA. So I think the nice thing the Aphasia Access website has done is list some things that you can ask or look for in programs to see if they're really LPAA. And then, a lot of us that are in aphasia centers, if you contact one of us, we can probably point you, but Jen is right. There are some areas where some states that don't have, or locales that don't have, and certainly the virtual programs are filling some of that need now.
Thank you. And then I just want to quickly share my screen. So on the aphasia.org website, you type in aphasia.org. If you scroll down to this blue area, this can help you find aphasia groups across the United States. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Our next question is about virtual groups. You had mentioned a little bit about them already. Are virtual groups as good as face-to-face?
So there's kind of a lot of, that's kind of a minefield in a way, but I would say, so I shared with the presentation best practices, and I think if virtual groups are following a lot of those, incorporating those best practices that I mentioned, then I think that they can be excellent. No two programs are exactly alike. So if you've tried one and it didn't work for you, you might look somewhere else. And everyone is a little bit different. I think, our members at the Aphasia Center of California kind of are grieving for that real face-to-face interaction that we had before the pandemic, and we have not met in face-to-face since March of 2020 in California. We're still online, but I would say that the virtual groups that we're doing have worked out much better than I ever anticipated. I think Edie, who's keywording right now, I mean, we were worried when we went to transition, and I think we've adapted, but I also think we have really skilled therapists, and that really helps too. So I'm kind of waffling a little bit. So I would say that, you're just like any profession, right? Sometimes the speech pathologist doing a group is just kind of a natural and has the skill and the experience and it can make it click. I told you, I think it's one of the hardest things to do as a therapist, because you have so many people with different amounts of aphasia, different types of skills, different interests, different personalities, and you're trying to keep everybody focused on what their goals are. There's a lot of moving pieces. Just an anecdote, when we were training master's clinicians, graduate students, it would usually take, like they were with us full time for their externship, it would usually take at least 10 weeks of like full time with us for their skill set to really come to the point where they could be doing it more independently. It's not easy to do it well.
Thank you. So what groups are there? What groups are out there for young adults with aphasia who are in their 20s and 30s?
So that's a great question. I know, so I'll tell you what we do at the Aphasia Center of California. I think there are a number of aphasia centers and some virtual groups like Aphasia Recovery Connection and others that have some specific groups. What we do, because we have a number of groups that meet each week as well, is that when I'm kind of steering people towards one of the groups, I do an interview over the phone and find out a lot about the person and talk to the family member if that's appropriate. And then I'll steer the younger people into kind of our younger group. It isn't officially a 20s and 30s group, but there's a lot of people in that age group, in that group. And so by default, it's become the younger group. Although I think we have one older gentleman in there who loves being with the younger people, so and they love having him too. So sometimes age is important. I don't know that it's actually the most important factor when grouping. So keep that in mind too. Certainly you have different interests and different points in your life, but sometimes it's nice to have a mix because people are coming at the recovery from different perspectives, and that's a nice thing to have in a group sometimes.
Thank you. And there are some suggestions for younger aphasia groups in the chat box right now. Okay, so our next question comes live. Can Dr. Elman comment on how to use the CAPE cards on her website?
So the CAPE cards are basically for speech language pathologists. So, and I want to say, those CAPE cards were developed by Maura Silverman and her staff at the Triangle Aphasia Project Unlimited in North Carolina. So Maura is a friend and colleague, and it was a surprise. So it's basically just a reminder for speech language pathologists to think about those things when they're working with someone, having that, determining goals, determining areas for remediation or intervention especially for those first few months. One of the reasons why I developed CAPE was people started coming to the Aphasia Center, and sometimes it was months or even years after their stroke, and none of those things had been done. So they had never met anyone else with aphasia. They hadn't been assessed for any kind of augmentative or alternative ways of communicating. No partner training had been given to their immediate family or friends, and they weren't aware of other resources or education about aphasia or stroke. And when I started seeing that pattern happening again and again, I thought, whoa, we need to kind of back up and give a framework for speech language pathologists in those first few months so that we don't miss. That's really for many people with aphasia, that's their main opportunity for therapy from a speech language pathologist. So it's not any magic, it's just kind of a mnemonic, right? A memory, like a little checklist. Okay, did I consider connecting people with each other, with other people with aphasia, to their families? Did I think about what can I do about augmentative and alternative communication? What can I do about partner training? Who needs to be trained? If the person's living in a skilled nursing facility, do I need to train the aides or the nurses? Education and resources. What things do people not know about that are available to them in the community if they have aphasia or if they're family members? So just to kind of jog the speech therapist's memory.
Thank you. Another question from our chat box. Could you please talk about the use of the life participation approach to aphasia for people with severe aphasia? It seems more natural with people with milder aphasia. What specific considerations would you recommend?
So life participation approach is really appropriate for anyone, and it isn't even really specific to aphasia. You could put any disorder or any type of, any of us, right? Life participation is what we all want to do. So I think what happens sometimes when people have severe aphasia or even mild aphasia is they're waiting to get back to their former self or their former activities or their former abilities, and they tend to withdraw and stop living their life. And so even someone, especially someone with severe aphasia, deserves to be involved in activities that are meaningful or interesting to them. It may not look exactly the same, right, as it did before, but they can sort activity. There are ways to assess what types of things do they want to be doing, and what kind of training does the speech language pathologist or the family need to get to help that person do those things. So I can, there are organizations, if the person is into sports, there are organizations in the Bay Area. There's an organization called BORP, which is a recreational based nonprofit that helps people with disabilities get back to doing different kinds of sports or outdoor activities. So that would be an example. Maybe they want to get back to riding a bicycle, and maybe it's not going to work to ride a traditional bicycle, but maybe a recumbent bicycle is still possible. So it's thinking a little bit out of the box. It may be going out, if the person was a gardener, right, and figuring out how could that person get back to gardening, even one-handed gardening, and there are ways to do that, or one-handed, you fill in the blank. You'd have to find out what that person wants to be pursuing. It's also that communication piece, right? So having that partner training provided by hopefully the speech language pathologist, but also you can go onto that Aphasia Institute website that we gave you before in Toronto and do your own training, and then figuring out how can I support that person's communication to allow them. So maybe they were big card. They like to play cards, and a lot of times people with aphasia are still really good at cards, and so they may need some supports. They may need a way to put their cards so that they don't have to hold them in their hand, right? They may use a shuffler to shuffle the cards. So there's ways to get back to doing things. They may need some communication supports where they can point to the suit if they're playing bridge. So where, the expression where there's a will, there's a way. There's usually ways to adapt almost anything to get back to doing it. And so even if you have severe aphasia.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, but we have so many questions. So I wanted to ask, what advice do you have for people who are typically more quiet, who don't like to be in groups, or who consider themselves introverts, especially if perhaps they feel a little bit insecure to advocate for themselves?
So I often get calls, or not often, but more than a few times, where a family member would say, oh, my mother or my father or my son or my daughter, they're not a group person. They never like being in a group. I don't think they want to be, they're not going to want to be in any group at the Aphasia Center of California. And usually what I'll say is, you know what, let's give it a try one time. And have them come. When we were face-to-face, they would come in, they would sit in with the group. We don't, there isn't a charge for that session. We don't want people to be there who want to be there. But oftentimes it was the people that I had been told, oh, they're not group people, that end up loving it. I can think of one, it happened to be an older lady whose daughter had told me she was never a group person. She didn't really like people that much. And she came, we did like that one session, that first session, and she was just, I mean, first of all, meeting other people who are living with aphasia is huge. That is such a profound, I think, intervention right then and there. And she loved it. Her daughter told me later that the day before, she would go in her closet and she would pick out what she was going to wear to the aphasia group the next day and put it out on her bed, because she was looking forward to it for the whole week. So I think don't second guess your family member. I think they should try it out wherever they are. And they may actually, I mean, think living with a communication disorder that can be so severe, that universality, seeing other people having it, getting hope from other people, you can't underestimate how important that is. And that person may become a real big group attender.
Thank you so much. Okay, we are actually just about at the top of the hour, and there are some more things I want to share. First, Dr. Elman, thank you so much for all of your work that you've done and for spending your time with us here today. And also, Giddy, thank you so much for being here with us. To our amazing audience, thank you so much for joining us today and sending over such compelling questions. If your question wasn't answered today, we will probably be bringing it up at future Ask the Experts, so please come visit us again. For more information on aphasia, to find the recording from today's webinar, and for more information on future events, please visit us at aphasia.org. I want to quickly share a few things on my page. Oh, sorry. So we do have a few upcoming Ask the Expert webinars. On January 27th, we have an author conversation with Segonia Tansman about her book, Hope After Stroke. And then on February 10th, a conversation with Maya Henry about primary progressive aphasia, PPA. And on the topic of group therapy, we have loads of online groups with the National Aphasia Association. We are about to start a new book for our book club. We also have a group called Professionals with Aphasia Connect, and that's for those who are interested in going back to work or who are at work. It's a peer-led conversation group for people with aphasia. And then on January 24th, we have the very special Work Out Your Words workout session. So if you've ever been interested in Pilates, this combines the movement of Pilates with words and speaking. And so that will be on January 24th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find all of these groups on aphasia.org/online-events. If you have any questions, you can also email me at jen@aphasia.org. And I'll put all this information in the chat box. Before we end, I want to again say thank you to Dr. Elman and see if there were any last words you want to sign us off with.
I would just say thank you for having me come. And I think that, no two people with aphasia are alike. I'm sure you've heard that from a number of different people that come, but that it's important to participate in life and not let aphasia stop you from doing some of the things you really love. Sometimes those things might be new to you, and some might be things you've done in the past, but never underestimate. Don't believe doctors or other healthcare professionals who tell you you're only going to get better for 6 months or a year. That is not evidence-based. So good luck to all of you, and thank you for your time and interest.
Thank you, everyone.